Hello, everyone. Dear attendees, thank you for joining us. My name is Orita Dato. I'm a retired Lieutenant General and the first woman at the rank of 3-star General in Israel, which is the theme of our webinar today, Women Attending Ranks in Today's Military, conducted by AIFL, America-Israel Friendship League, with JWI, Jewish Women International. I'm also a board member of the AIFL, the American Israeli Friendship League. Well, I had the privilege to serve my country for about 25 years in the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, up to the rank of a general as the head of the Women's Corps, mainly in command and training positions, and engaging women in many military professions and positions at all ranks. I also had the privilege 20 years ago to become the first woman heading a security organization, Israel Prison Service, which is considered as security organization in Israel because of managing thousands of terror inmates in its facilities, alongside with the correctional system of penal inmates. For 9 years, I've been Vice President of the International Correction and Prison Association, former President of the International Women Forum Israel, founder and former board member of Forum Dvorah, Women in Security and Foreign Affairs, as well as board member, as I said, of AIFL, and a chair of Gesher nowadays. We will discuss today the issue of women roles in military in the US and Israel armed forces, considering the similarities and differences between these two countries regarding women military service, such as the US military is a professional one, while in Israel, it is a mandatory service for men as well as for women at the age of 18. Military service and reaching higher ranks in Israel is an important component in the Israeli society, playing a crucial role in social mobilization and integration in high public, political, economical positions. As well as in the US armed forces, all professions are open for women to volunteer, including all combat positions, while in the IDF, there are some combat units and professions positions that are not open for women volunteers, may I say, yet not open for women volunteers. We will hear about the progress that has been achieved during the last 2 decades in the IDF, as well as the progress in the US Armed Forces as well. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for this panel, Ms. Meredith Jacobs, the CEO of JWI, Jewish Women International. Ms. Jacobs is an award-winning journalist and former editor-in-chief of Washington Jewish Week. She is the author of Modern Jewish Mom's Guide to Shabbat and co-author with her daughter, Sophie, on Just Between Us. Jacobs has served for 6 years as JWI Chief Operation Officer, managing communication, branding, messaging, and development. She led a lot of leadership development and initiatives, working closely with the philanthropist partners. Before joining JWI, Jacobs was the founder of Modern Jewish Momcom and host of radio different shows. Previously served as the director of family programming for Sixth and I Historic Synagogue and facilitator for the Washington, D.C. Mother Cycle. She earned a BA from Haverford College and an MBA from Johns Hopkins University. Meredith, the floor, the Zoom, the webinar is yours.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you not only for serving as our host today, but for agreeing to stay on to be part of our conversation. As Ori mentioned, I had the distinct privilege of traveling to Israel a year ago, June, with AIFL's Women of Israel mission. And among the many really fascinating Israeli women we met, one stood out, a young woman who was smart, passionate, committed. She also happened to be the woman who is currently serving as the highest ranking female combat officer for the IDF. I have to say she was so inspiring. All of us attending the mission went a little rogue and invited her to meet with us a second time. And I think those conversations with her and seeing how she uniquely led as a woman, some of the things she just very honestly spoke about, I think awakened a personal awareness in me in the role that women play in the military. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was able to moderate a panel for my organization, for JWI, of Jewish women elected officials. This was part of our celebration of 100 years of the passage of the 19th Amendment. But among the panelists was Congresswoman Elaine Luria. And Congresswoman Luria is unique in that among all of the Democratic members of the House of Representatives, she is the one who has served the longest in the military. In fact, she retired as a commander, having served her entire career as a nuclear-trained surface warfare officer, culminating in a command of combat-ready unit of 400 sailors. And while I'm interested in learning more about the military, because this May my son will commission as a Navy officer, as CEO of an organization committed to women's leadership, I'm fascinated by the way women in the military lead and what we can learn from them. For those of you who are new to my organization, Jewish Women International is a 123-year-old organization, originally known as B'nai B'rith Women. And our mission is building a world in which all women may thrive. We work every day to end violence against women and girls, build access to long-term economic security, and connect highly accomplished women as mentors and role models to the next generation of women leaders. I invite you to learn more at jwi.org. But now I'd like to introduce our inspiring panel because we have much to cover today. Brigadier General Sharon Nir has extensive senior management experience with military IT and cyber units. She was the first woman to hold the position of commander of the IDF National School of Communication and Cyber Defense, a National Council member for the Integration of Women in Science and Technology. She recently served as the gender advisor to the IDF Chief of Staff, responsible for the full range of gender issues in military operations, with an emphasis on integrating women into diverse professions and roles. And now a woman of many firsts, and a 30-plus year with the U.S. Navy, Retired Vice-Admiral Carol Pottinger was the first female 3-star admiral in American history to lead a combat branch. She commanded 2 ships, a logistic force of 30 ships, a Japan-based strike group of 8 ships, and the expeditionary force of 40,000 sailors, 40,000 sailors. She was also the senior U.S. flag officer responsible for military transformation and sensitive military topics such as counterterrorism and cybersecurity while on assignment with NATO. Ms. Pottinger currently serves on private, public, and nonprofit boards, including PricewaterhouseCoopers, the U.S. Navy Memorial Foundation in Washington, D.C., and is a member of the Jewish Institute for National Security of America Advisory Board. And we thank JINSA for their support for this webinar. So welcome, all of you. Let's begin. I know this answer will be different from those of you who served in the IDF versus U.S. military because of the nature of conscripted versus volunteer service. But even for those of you who maybe had to serve, I'd love each of you to speak personally about what inspired your service. Carol, can I begin with you?
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you for including me today. It's a real honor to be with such distinguished colleagues. And it means a lot to me to have an opportunity to speak on this topic with our audience and with you as well. So just to maybe make it pretty brief, and we can go into more details later, when I decided I wanted to serve my country, I was a very patriotic young woman This is back in the early 70s. And women in my career growing up could really only be nurses, teachers, and flight attendants if you wanted to do something very glamorous. There weren't a lot of other opportunities, but the military was starting to open up. And so I went to Purdue University thinking I would be a Navy nurse. And once I got there and was able to participate in what we call ROTC, which you mentioned your son is in right now, bless him. And I learned things like navigation and ship engineering and leadership. And I thought, this stuff is really cool. I don't want to be a nurse. I want to go on ships. Unfortunately, women couldn't yet serve on ships, but that all changed. So I would say what sparked my interest was a passion to serve, an opportunity to make a difference, and to do something challenging that would push me and be hard, be difficult, would make me grow. And boy, has that happened in spades throughout my career. And so you mentioned a couple of the highlights. I was one of the first women to have that opportunity to serve on ships. And I use the phrase, I think the military gives you the opportunity to be equal. It doesn't give you equal opportunity. It opens the door, and then it's up to you to get in there, you know, kick the door down if you have to, but with the proper mentors, which I always had throughout my career, to really be all that you can be, which is another favorite motto of the Navy. So I had that chance throughout my career to take big strides and do things that I never could have imagined, and grow and learn and lead. And at the end of the day, maybe I would say the most reward I got was serving alongside such dedicated and committed members, sailors, Marines, you know, all of the services. And I got a lot more than I gave. I got a lot more than I gave in my 36 years of service. So I'll pause there and hand off to one of my colleagues.
Well, actually, just before we turn to Sharon, I wanted to follow up a little bit. It's interesting that you started really in nursing. Did you graduate? Did you begin your service as a nurse, or did you shift during, like, what was your service assignment? And then can you speak a little bit to the mentors you had? I'm assuming they were men. You know, what was that like? How did you kind of position yourself to have, or was it, I love the way you said equal opportunity. You know, how were you able to get those positions? Was it just whoever asked, or whoever kind of was recognized as someone who they wanted to pull along?
So I was never a nurse. As soon as I started college at Purdue, then I realized that wasn't the path I wanted to pursue. So I was commissioned after my 4 years at university as a unrestricted line officer, but could not serve in any combat branches. And then the following year is when the first ships opened, and they were our big old repair ships that didn't deploy much, and you know, but still it was a big step forward for the Navy. The rest of our combatant ships didn't open until 20 years later in the 90s, actually 20 years later in the 90s. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But in terms of that opportunity to be equal, yes, my mentors were all men. In fact, I never worked for a woman in my entire career. And I wouldn't be surprised if my Israeli colleagues say the same thing. I never had a female boss. And I was usually the only, or one of the only women in a unit, on a ship, you know, ashore, whatever the assignment was. But honestly, with a very few exceptions, my male leaders were incredibly supportive. They opened those doors. They made those opportunities available. I had to go do the work. I had to prove myself, of course, but I think any young officer has to do that. Nobody hands that to you. And so I think that, you know, despite many stories out there about the military, you know, culture and all of that, and there's always a bad apple, I don't dispute that. But my experience has definitely been positive, definitely been that they're looking for talent. They want the best people who can serve and who want to contribute. And they don't care what your race, color, gender, they don't care about any of that. They want to know if you're there to pitch in and do your job and serve your country. And that's what I always tried to do. And they gave me their wholehearted support.
Fantastic. Sharon, let me turn to you. And of course, in Israel you had to serve, but what inspired your service? Why did you choose the path, your unique path to service? And can you speak to perhaps, like Harold did, of any mentors you had along the way who helped you as you grew through the ranks?
First of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege for me to be here, part of this important panel, and I am very honored. I began my service in the IDF 30 years ago and grew up to be a senior manager. During my service, I had the opportunity to serve and contribute the state of Israel, and by the way, I developed myself, my skills and my abilities. It is important to understand that there is a strong link between the military service in Israel and the Israeli society. Therefore, I believe that by promoting in position during the service, I myself had the opportunity to make an impact on the military organization, and also I could help to create a better society in Israel. I was inspired very much during my service because I had the opportunity from the beginning to command and lead a lot of soldiers and commanders in mandatory service. And for me, it was a very, very big privilege, I must say. And by commanding people, I think that it's an opportunity to educate them and design the way they think about unique challenges and unique missions like we have in Israel. And I want to emphasize that along the 30 years of my service, I done my best to deserve the trust of my subordinates. And that trust was very, very important and meaningful for me. I always looked for meaningful positions, and that's the way that I go from role to role, from station to station, and I promote by that and promote by skills. And I must say that I was in roles that before wasn't done by women. For example, I was commander of battalion of C4I battalion in the Central Command. And once I did it the first time, after me, there were a lot, not a lot, but more women that went to command on battalions like the one that you remind Dana Ben Ezra, that she's a very, very special officer in the IDF, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do a role that could open for another woman. And I think that it's an evolution process. It's advancing from year to year. I must say that what happened in the 3 or 2 decades, the last 3 or 2 decades, affect the IDF and affect also the Israeli society, as I said, the position of women in the Israeli society, and it's very important.
You know, you brought up so many different topics. I'm almost struggling to ask the correct follow-up. There's so many things we're going to get to. But I think what resonated when you were talking about Donna, who is the young woman I mentioned earlier, who we met, and she talked about the responsibility of paving the way for other women, of growing in her particular service in combat, so that other women had a role model, so that she was paving that path. Both of you have served as firsts, as breakthroughs. And I wonder if you can speak to that sense of responsibility did you knowingly think, I'm the first woman in this position, I'm helping other women, I'm paving the way for other women? or was that really not a part of it? How much did that play into your personal growth?
I think that it's a part of the role and the duty, and by myself, I went to these places because I knew that I can lead a change in the IDF if I will open a position for another woman. It was very challenging for me and very inspiring things to do. And that's the reason that I choose this place, not the comfortable places. I went to non-comfortable areas in the IDF, but it was very inspiring, and it was very, as you said, it was a responsibility that you can't, you must do it perfect if you are going to these places, because you feel that you have the duty, not only for yourself, you have the duty for the whole generation after you, and that's the reason that I think that you use the word responsibility, and it's correct.
Carol, you talk so much about being the only woman in the room. You know, what was that like for you? And were you aware of what you were doing that changed the U.S. military for other women?
Yeah, I think I'd answer your question a little differently, and I'm thinking here, wondering why that is. I think that I would say in my early years, maybe even first 15 or so years, that, and I know I shared this sentiment with many of the women who were the forerunners. We didn't want to be noticed. We didn't want to stick out. We wanted to just do our job. We didn't want to be interviewed. We didn't want our names in the paper about the first for this or that. And we were much more interested in making sure our team was successful, whatever our role was, that we were doing the best we could. And it was quite painful, actually, to be pointed out as the first of this or that. But what I did realize, and to your point, is that it does matter. I think this really came clear to me as a junior flag officer, a 1-star, when I was out in the Pacific on board my flagship off Japan. And I was mobbed by young enlisted women who said things like, you know, someone who looks like us, someone that we can identify with, someone that we can point to and say, if she can do it, I can do it. And it took me maybe not quite that long, but it took me a while to really accept that as part of my responsibility, to use the word that you did, in terms of paying it forward, of making sure that the opportunities I had and more were available to young women, you know, across the board. But I'll also say, and temper that I've always believed, again, back to that talent argument. I wanted to make everyone who was capable to succeed. I wanted to help all of them be successful. And maybe in later years, I did lean more towards helping women. And certainly since I've retired, I've been very much focused on how I could help move that along. But maybe because in Israel, it's required to serve, and in the US, it's a volunteer service, that there's actually a different dynamic at work in terms of how women in service are perceived. And this is maybe a thought that you want to tug on a little bit. I don't know.
Can I add something?
Go ahead, please, Orit. Yes.
Yep. I would say that one more thing that I was thinking about is when you reach a high position as a woman, you have to remember how challenging, and I'm not saying hard or problems or whatever, how challenging it has been for you, and then identify where are the talented and qualified women, not all of them because they are women, and make it a little friendlier for them to go through that path. Because it wasn't that easy. It was challenging. to reach another position and another position. And men and women were looking at you, sometimes under a magnifying glass, whether you're doing the work as well, and we have heard it both from Sharon and Carol. And secondly, for the women looking at you as a role model. And when looking at you as a role model, it means also that you are looking at them. And Carol said, if she can do it, I can do it. I was always saying to the younger officers, female and men as well, but mostly female, if I can do it, you can do it. I'm sure you can do it. That's my contribution to this one.
But you also brought up something that struck me, that resonated with something that Sharon said. And I believe, Sharon, you said you felt this need to be perfect at what you were doing. And Orit, you said you were more under a microscope. And so I'm wondering, and I want to turn to Sharon for this, in your work as gender advisor to the IDF Chief of Staff, what's happening, what's changing that is maybe making it easier, where Orit said how challenging it was as a woman to be promoted or to have those opportunities? What are you seeing changing in the IDF? And then Carol, I would love to pivot to you with the same, what, if anything, is changing in the US military, and even to speak to women getting into positions like infantry, special forces, some of those maybe positions that aren't traditional for women to hold.
First of all, the gender advisor vision, my vision for women's service was to promote equal opportunities for men and women. And by the way, to promote and to improve the effectiveness of the IDF. And I think it's go together. We have to understand that in order to have a better military, we have to promote the best women and men to a combat position and to a special position. And if we understand this point, that equal opportunities serve the organization, we can make the change. And the mandatory service in Israel, we have to learn the history, and I want to say a few words about the history. The mandatory service in Israel applies to men and women from the beginning. It's an obligation in Israel, and it was from the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. This was not something to be taken for granted, especially on those days, but things are changed because in the beginning, there were structural differences between women's service and men's service. First, the role at the beginning of the establishment of the State of Israel, the combat roles was only for men, and the duration was different. The duration of the service was short for women and longer for men. Things are changed. And it's changed in 2000. And in 2000, women in the IDF from 2000 can serve in combat roles and combat units. Today, women who wish to serve in combat role are required to volunteer for 32 months like men for mandatory service. This is according to the due training and the long period of training course. Today we have, and I'm very glad to say that we have women in the IDF almost in every combat unit. We have women in a border defense battalion, in home front battalion, and we have women in a Navy course, naval course, and in the Air Force. We don't have women in infantry units and armor corps and special forces yet. And all that because of the differences and the anatomical differences between men and women. But we change and we look from the point of view of equal opportunities for men and women. And that's the way that we check every role in order to advance. And that's the difference that happened in the 2 decades ago. I can say, and I'm very proud of it, that the rate of women, of combat women in the IDF are going higher and higher from day to day. And from 2010 and 2020, we grew up in 600% of combat women in combat units. And it's very important because, as I say, it changed not only the IDF, it's changed the whole society and the place of the women in the Israeli society. And that was actually, that was the most important thing that I did in my last role.
Carol, can you talk about your involvement as a member of Dakowitz and what the commission has achieved in support of women in the military?
I will. Let me couch it, though, in kind of the same vein as the discussion we were just having. It's funny, when I first joined the Navy, and for many, many years, we were always under the impression that Israel was the only military in the world where women could do anything, right? And we heard this over and over and over again. It doesn't matter that it was never true. That's what we heard. And we were like, why can't the US military be like that? Why can't we serve on ships and in combat? You know, we can do it. Let us go. Let us do it. And in fact, at this point, because only about 4 years ago, our Secretary of Defense at the time, Ash Carter, did open up all combat assignments to women. So now we've a little bit leapfrogged, only in policy, not actually in execution, which I'll touch on. So you mentioned Dakowitz. It's a commission, an advisory commission to the Secretary of Defense. It's been created since General George C. Marshall after World War II. It was the first Defense Advisory Committee ever stood up. And over the years, over the decades, it has provided many, many recommendations to the Secretary of Defense on making opportunities available to women, on ensuring that they had the combat gear they needed as we've come into the more recent times, et cetera. Hundreds and hundreds of recommendations, many of which have been accepted and implemented. So it was a very influential commission over these 5-6 decades of existence. And I served on that commission after I was retired. There's no active duty on the commission, obviously conflict of interest. And so I served on the commission after I retired and was part of that final recommendation to Secretary of Defense Carter to make that last step to open all assignments to women. And he did that. And I think it was a very brave move. So now where are we? Honestly, and listening to my Israeli colleagues' comments about, where the women serve now in Israel, in the forces there, most of our successes, I think, have been in the Navy and the Air Force. And that's because we can go serve on ships and fly planes. And maybe it's just the nature of those opportunities, of those missions that appealed more to women than, being an infantryman, because there's very few women still, women officers, a few more women enlisted in infantry and the Army and National Guard. There are dozens, maybe hundreds, I don't think so, but dozens anyway. And in the Marine Corps, yet we might have a couple, I think, that have finished infantry officer school, but I don't think they've yet deployed or been assigned to a unit, though I could be dated. So why is it that we have really thousands now of women serving on ships in the Navy and flying aircraft, and in the Air Force flying aircraft, yet minute numbers serving in infantry, and if any in the special forces, other than the support branches? I don't think so yet either. The SEALs, the special forces that we have in the various services. And my assumption is, and I think about this a lot, it's partly culture, that women still can't look up and see someone that looks like them, right? There's not very many O3s or O5s, and certainly no admirals or generals in the Marine Corps and Army that a young woman can look up and say, I can do that too. A lot of the academies have all been open, the services academies have all been open since the 80s. So a lot of those women would have made flag rank by now that came out of West Point. But again, very few have taken the opportunity since the combat exclusion was lifted. And I regret that. And I think that it will change over time, but it is a hard path. Certainly talk about sticking up and having the press spotlight on you all the time. Very, very challenging. And perhaps, again, those cultures are not quite as ready as the Navy and the Air Force and the Coast Guard have been welcoming in that perspective. So Dakowitz has had a big impact. I've been very proud to serve, but at the end of the day, there's still work to do. And I really hope that we can crack the code to get more women to step into those combat units, specifically the ground combat units, because they can do it. I know they can do it. They just, need to get out there and make it happen.
Ori, thank you. Ori, was there a similar path for women? Did you find in Israel it was more opportunities in the Israeli Navy and Air Force first before Army units?
Let's say that the first, there was an apply to the Supreme Court for a young cadet in officer course when I was the commander of the training base. And she asked to open the pilot course, which was closed until that. It was 1994, if I remember well, or 1995. She applied to the Supreme Court, and there was a need for a decision and a court decision to open pilot course for women in Israel. That was the beginning. At the same time, there were women in, at the same time, that opened the path for women for combat positions. It began with the pilot course, and it went all over in other corps like the border guard and others like the anti-aircraft missiles and whatever at the beginning, what now is called the aerial defense in Israel. And the second ongoing apply to the Supreme Court was for the Naval Officer course. And then I was the head of the Women's Corps. I told the Chief of Staff, so if there was a decision to open by the court to open the pilot course, it would be for sure they will order us to open the Naval course. So let's become proactive and say, we are opening the course for women. And that was the second, let's say, very desired course that has been opened for women. Since then, things have developed and there is a lot of progress. But I was very happy to hear from Sharon that at the last 2 decades, that was really the jump of integrating women, because it cost me and my colleagues a lot of work to do so, to open it for the chance for women to enter those units. I would say one more sentence. The rationale for integrating women into many positions in the IDF is also from the fact that the only relative advantage that we have in our area is the human resource. We cannot allow ourselves not to fully utilize the potential, and women are a very crucial part of that potential. That was the way that I managed to open new positions and professions by saying, hey guys, you need them. We need them, not you, we. It's not you and us, it's we. We need them.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I couldn't agree more. And a couple of the senior 4-stars that I worked throughout my career said exactly that. 50% of the population is female, whatever the exact percentage is. We can't afford to not recruit and promote from that part of our, American population. We just must find the talent, especially with the volunteer force, even more difficult to ensure that we can keep our numbers where they need to be, and to bring the right people in to serve and to lead.
And in fact, a member of our viewing audience today, Carol, just dropped into the chat that we have our first woman Green Beret in the U.S. So Carol, thank you. In fact, we have people listening in from Kuwait, Tel Aviv, Boston, Nevada. I'm seeing all kinds of things in the chat, so thank you all. And Sharon, was there anything you wanted to add to this particular question?
I think that we have to look on another point. The point is the percentage of women in a career service and in high-rate positions, like general, brigadier general. And I think that in Israel, in the IDF, from the changing that I was speaking about in 2000, there was a change in the rate and in the percentage of women in a high rank position, because it's go together. If soldier have a meaningful and challenge position in the beginning, she can be promoted to a high rank position. She have the motivate, she have the self-confidence, and she can become a general and to be equal and in her position on the table, as we say before. Women among other men, if she starts in the same point and in the same position in combat roles, she can develop and be in a high rank position. And I'm glad to say that we have a change in high rank position also in the IDF, and the rate is going and getting higher. Thank you.
How are women, as we're ascending the ranks in both militaries, changing the militaries? Do you see any differences generally in the way women lead from the way men lead? What, in addition to just pure manpower, what are women bringing to our militaries?
I call it women leadership. It's a leader. It's a leading, maybe different leadership, maybe different style, maybe it's diverse the organization of the leadership, but it's a leadership. It's pure leadership with women touch, and I think that's when you do something, or when you have to get a decision and you have diverse leaders on the table, you can get the best decision.
Yes, I would again totally agree. We talked a little bit in our pre-call about emotional intelligence, and did women profess to have more emotional intelligence than men? I think that women and men may generally lead a little differently, but it's the combination that is effective. To bring all of those different types of skill sets and leadership sets to the mission. That to me is what's effective. And there's, men who can be very harsh leaders, and there's women who can be very harsh leaders, but they can still be very effective. There's men and women who can both be very empathetic leaders and still very effective. So I don't think there's a single mold. I don't think men or women bring more or less. But I do think every leader needs to look in the mirror every morning and decide what they could do to be a better leader. That's universal in my opinion. We can always be better leaders. And so, if someone might be too empathetic, maybe they need to learn to be firm, and vice versa. But in terms of what do women bring to the change in the military, I think was your question, Meredith. I think, as we said, it's the diverse perspective. You know, definitely your experiences shape you. And me coming up in my military experience is different than a male colleague who maybe was commissioned at the same time as me, maybe even had the same career path as I did, still going to have a different experience, so going to come to the table with a different perspective. And that's the value, is bringing all of those different perspectives together.
Carol, I think you're so right. In any organization, corporation, they say the more effective ones are those with a diversity in their leadership. You know, I love when you were talking about how a leader has to look in the mirror. All of you are now retired. What did your leadership in the military teach you or change you for the way you're leading now outside of the military? You know, and I ask this because my son's first class in college was naval leadership and management. How does the Navy lead, and how do you apply that to business and other organizations? So my question to all of you is, what did you learn about leadership from your service? Or Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make, it's a little bit of a joke, but not really. You know, half the deal is looking cool, right? So even if you're nervous, even if you lack confidence, even if you don't know how you got where you are and what you're doing there, looking cool is half the deal. So, you know, that would be my advice to your son, is look confident and the rest will come. And,
so you're not talking about the leather jacket and the aviator?
Yeah,
That's more than that.
Cool and confident. That's part of it, yeah. So yeah, I think just being pushed and growing and being exposed to very, very difficult circumstances, indeed, you know, life-threatening circumstances when you serve in the military, whether it's you or your troops, and learning to deal all the time, every day, with risk and the risk-reward equation, and how do you get the mission done and bring everyone home safely. These are things that a corporate leader doesn't necessarily have to deal with every day. And so I think what young men and women learn in being a military leader is really unable to be, in the most part, replicated, in my view, in the corporate world. But they can take those skill sets out to the corporate world and be better. And this is one thing that I regret, that we don't have universal service, national service. I think everyone benefits from service of some kind. It doesn't have to be military service. You know, do something in your community, work for the Forest Service. I don't care. You learn, you become a better leader and a better person by giving back and by being part of, you know, the bigger ideal. And I think that's really important. And we're losing that, I think, in America. And I really envy that in Israel, you know, for that reason alone. I think it does meld a more united citizenry with a better understanding and clarity of what they're supposed to be, you know, doing with their lives.
I'm so glad you said that. That was actually going to be my follow-up question. By the way, I do invite at this point anyone who's listening to drop questions into the chat or on Facebook. I remember watching on television John McCain's funeral. And one of the things one of the commentators said was that in past generations, our Congress was filled with people who had served, and how that has changed. They were speculating that it might change back now that we have more who've served in Iraq. Afghanistan might be coming up and running for office now. But what did we lose from having leaders who knows what it means to put partisanship aside, to serve for the purpose of serving the country? What does that bring? And so I want to ask Orit and Sharon, how do you feel, and this is so embedded in Israel culture, society from the very beginning, as Sharon said, how does that shared service shape the society, and what can the U.S. learn from it?
Well, I want to say a few words for the former question, because you've asked what it taught us to be a leader in the military. Well, when I came to the prison service, and I was the only one who came from the military, and I wasn't still a woman, and I was promoted, and it was really a breakthrough, and they didn't accept me in the best way, let's say. So So I have learned that first of all, you have to trust your people, trust your subordinates, trust their professionalism, care for them, show them that you care for them. Then you'll get the best result if you share with them, if you give them the feeling that you are backing them anyway. And I think that in that matter, my leadership was totally different from what they have known before, and maybe even a little bit later on. Speaking on the Israeli society, well, there will be people that would say we need the generals in the parliament, in the Knesset, because it is, they know what are the needs, they know what is partnership, they know what is teamwork more than others. Yes, this is one side of it. But for the issue of women integration into high positions, sometimes it plays the other way, because the old boys network goes with them to governmental positions, to even in the commercial positions, economical positions, and the vast majority is old boys network, not women. So there are two phases to look at that situation. One thing that is very important, that those people who served in different, not only military, but the security organization, the Mossad, the police, they come with kind of values of serving until they are being spoiled by the others. But in the beginning, at least they come with that feeling that they come to serve. They are serving now in a different way the country. Sharon?
The IDF is the bubble of the society in Israel, as I said, because every house has soldiers. I myself have two soldiers now. My two children serve in the IDF. It's their duty. I have a daughter that she's training infantry in the IDF and combat, and son that he's a combat soldier. And I think that it's very important, the serving, because it affects the society, and we have to understand it. If women in the IDF can dream, and that's what I did, I had the opportunity to dream, and to dream far, and to execute, and it's happened in the IDF and in the mandatory service. So the position of women in the Israeli society will be better after the soldier will serve in their mandatory service. So it's very important that we have equal opportunities in the IDF, because, as I said, it affects the whole society.
Unfortunately, we're getting close to needing to wrap up. I am seeing a lot of questions. I just want to acknowledge that things are not perfect for women in the military. There are still some real challenges that I know our Congress is looking into addressing. There are things that are being attempted to change within the system for challenges that women face. But I would love to hear from each of you, kind of as the follow ending question. What advice would you give to women looking to serve? What do you want women just starting to know, as you said, from your years of decades of service and leadership? Sharon, since you're on the screen, how about if I start with you? What is your...
I think that the most important thing that I want to say to young soldiers or young women that recruit now, it's not to be afraid and to dare and to dream and to be brave. And if they come with the motivate, they can get very higher. And as you see, all of us, flesh and blood, and we went to a high rank position. So it's possible. It's not impossible.
All right.
I would say dream, dare, and insist on doing what you are dreaming of. That's it.
And Carol?
I think choosing the military as a young woman is an incredible chance to learn about yourself, to gain responsibility at a very young age. Nowhere else, I don't think, in any opportunity, any position, can you lead right out of college, right out of the box with 20 or 200 or even more sailors, you know, looking to you for their leadership. And you can, you know, you don't have to decide to do a career. Just think about joining and serving your country and testing yourself, something that is very hard but very rewarding, and take it a year at a time. And you know, if it fits you, great. If it doesn't, stay in the reserves. But think about it as one of many options that you have as a young woman in the United States. And it's a very special option, and it really will give you rewards and life skills that I think you cannot get anywhere else.
I think you're so right. My sister-in-law served actually as an OBGYN in the Navy. She was a lieutenant. My nephews were born when she and my brother-in-law were stationed in Italy. Wow. And she speaks to that the experience she had right out of medical school was unlike what her peers had. But she also said, and I see this reflected in all of you, were the kind of people she was surrounded by in her service are the kind of outstanding citizens that just inspired her to work, that the people you are surrounded with who choose a career of service are just truly special people. And I know I, for one, as a citizen, are grateful for your service, and I thank you for your service and for your continued leadership. So with that, Orit, I want to turn it back to you to wrap things up.
Thank you, Meredith. It's a bit, different for me to be the host and as well as to speak as a panelist part of the question. I couldn't, avoid answering some of the questions. I think what we had this evening is listening to 3 different experiences, because even though Sharon and myself are Israelis, we are different ages and different experience, because what Sharon had the opportunity to do, I didn't even have the opportunity to dream about. So we see the process, the progress that is going on in both militaries. I really enjoyed to listen to you and to hear from Carol and from Sharon on their own experience and feelings. I think it was open. We didn't, hide anything. We said what we feel, and that's, I think, an advantage in such a kind of webinar. Thank you so much, Retired Vice-Admiral Carol Pottinger. Thank you so much, Sharon, my dear friend, Brigadier General Sharon, for enlightening us. And thank you, Meredith, for moderating. Thank you, AIFL, American Israel Friendship League, and JWI, Jewish Women International, for this interesting webinar, and you, our audience, for joining us. Thank you, and have a good day, and we have a good night here in Israel. Thank you so much.